Probably, if I had stayed in Hebrew school, I would have been fairly fluent. But the problem was, I stopped doing that in about 7th grade when we moved to Dallas. And that's right at the point that you went from learning and reading to speaking and being in a position where you could become conversational in it. So I know a few words. Like, it's always interesting to me. We're going to talk about Cain and Abel today. Well, the word Cain in Hebrew means yes, which is fascinating. But in so many words in Hebrew, there's a double meaning. There's more than one thing, okay? So it's sort of interesting, but I still can read as long as the vowels are there. In the Torah, there are no vowels. There are only consonants. So in order to really read the Torah, you almost have to memorize it in order to read the Torah. So all you get is consonants. I mean, try to read an English sentence, just any sentence with consonants only. Now, you'll get some of the words because you'll say, okay, well, that's obviously, if you see something like RMBR, you're going to say, well, that's remember. I mean, that's what that word's going to be. But there are other words that you look at and say, I don't know what that is. So one of the interesting parts of becoming a bar mitzvah is when you learn your Torah portion. And when I say Torah, you all understand that basically the scrolled Torah that sits in the ark at a temple is just the 5 books. It's not the law and the prophets and everything. It's just the 5 books. Well, that scroll is read from beginning to end every year, every single year. So wherever your bar mitzvah lands, that's your portion. Okay, you got it. Whatever week it is, that's the one that you're going to read. And so you learn it with the vowels first, and then once you do that, then you can pretty much memorize it and do it. And you're also 13, and your brain's not as cluttered, and you can actually do stuff like that, which is pretty good.
Why are the vowels not there?
Save paper.
Can you buy it?
Can you buy a vowel?
I'm certain you can. I suspect it has to do with a more ancient. If you look at hieroglyphics, there's no vowel sound. It's a symbolic language, and Hebrew began as a symbolic language. And I think that probably as it became more modern, and people wanted to read it, and then there became books that didn't exist. Remember, probably for the first 1,000 years, it was chanted, and the only person that knew it was a scribe or the person who was the rabbi who got taught how to do it. That's it. And so I think that's probably it, but I really don't know the answer. Sig would know the answer to that. Sig would have that. Okay, we are going to study about Cain and Abel. And this is, I think, one of the hardest lessons because it's just very, it's about what your gift is and why you give it and what heart you give it with. And that's a really big deal. There's a lot of this story that really sort of sticks in your craw. But here's a funny thing, and we're all old enough to know Seinfeld, okay? So the Hebrew word, if you go, we are on chapter 4 in Genesis, and I want to read you the first line. It says, Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. Now, the Hebrew word for that is he knew his wife, and that word is yada. So yada, yada, yada. Yada means to know or understand. Well, it never even crossed my mind. So it actually, when people use that terminology, it actually is not just a throwaway word. It really means something. So the word yada is to know someone in the biblical sense. Okay, that was sort of funny. That was pretty good there.
What does Yabba Dabba do?
That's sort of like the difference between naked and naked. Okay? Remember that we have gone from the wonder of creation in our first week. We talked about not focusing on the 7 days as individual days or how long it was or what does it mean. And we're going to talk about this too when it comes to genealogy, because I don't think it makes a hill of beans difference who lived 776 years and who lived whatever. It doesn't matter. But when you read the first chapters of the beginning of Genesis, we need to focus on the wonder of creation, that God breathed it and it was so. Okay? And then last week we talked about the fall. And this week we're going to talk about the consequence of the fall and how the perfect family in the perfect situation perfectly screwed up. Okay? And we talked last week and spent quite a bit of time. When you really read it carefully, God does not blame Eve at all. God blames Adam because God spoke to Adam and told Adam what to do. And what does Adam say when God says, "What are you doing?" What does Adam say? It is because you, God, who put that woman here with me. He blames God first and then the woman. Anybody but himself. Okay? Eve just says, the serpent deceived me, which was true. I mean, was absolutely spot on true. Adam goes, it wasn't me, it was her. And it's your fault because if you hadn't put her here, right?
Right.
That's right. If you just intercepted the ball.
we've got kids like
Yes.
Right. Now, so Adam lay with his wife Eve. We're in chapter 4 now, Genesis 4. And she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. Cain was the firstborn. She said, with the help of the Lord, which is great. She understood, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Abel's an interesting Hebrew word. It means nothing. It means like vanishing, gone. Okay? Because, of course, Abel goes away. Now, Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruit of the soil as an offering to the Lord. So I think one of the first things to understand is clearly, in the last chapter, we talked about the fact that when Adam and Eve eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that one of the things that happens is they realize that they're naked. Well, they knew they were naked before, but now they're ashamed. So they make some fig leaves. So after God pronounces that they're going to be kicked out of Eden and this is all going to happen, what does God do? He says he makes them a skin for clothing, which means you had to sacrifice an animal. So clearly, in this intervening period of time, the idea of sacrifice is introduced from Adam to his sons. Okay? In the fullness of time, or during the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought fat portions for some of the firstborn of his flock. Let me give you a different translation of this, just a little bit. And this is King James, which is sometimes hard, but sometimes really beautiful. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and his offering he had not respect. So Cain brings, and this is interesting, Cain brings, he brings some fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brings the best. Abel brings the best of what he has. The firstborn, the purest, and the fat. Okay? And that's, I think, the first thing. What is your heart when you give? Is it an afterthought? Is it what's left over? Or is it the most important part, knowing that that what you're doing is giving to God what is your very, very, very best? Okay? So the Lord looks with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. Actually, the word is turn away in Hebrew. He turned away. He turned toward Abel, but turned away from Cain. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Verse 6, the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? It's very interesting. In the first part of Genesis, always God is calling to his children. Why are you? Where are you? What are you doing? Not that he doesn't know. He obviously knows, but he's trying to get him to answer. Why is your face downcast? And then he says to Cain, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? You knew, your dad taught you that to me come the first fruits, the best of what you have, not the afterthought. You knew what was right. But then he says something great, but if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you. But you must master it. And I think that's a great picture. Sin crouches at your door and it desires to have control over you, but you must master it. So God says to Cain, I turned away from you because you and I both know that you did not bring to me what you were supposed to bring to me. I'm your God, I'm your maker, I'm your creator. I want to have this relationship with you. You screwed up. You know what to do. Do it. Okay? And God says, surely if you do what is right, I will find your sacrifice acceptable. But what does Cain do? Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out into the field. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. So he, out of envy, he premeditatedly took his brother out into the field and killed him. His own kid brother. Okay? Then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? I don't know, Cain replied. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. This would not be a good exchange, I don't think. This would not be a happy discussion at this point in time. This is bad. What's astonishing is that Cain thought he could get away with it. That sin crouching at your door, who desires to have you, is so powerful. The envy, he was so angry with his brother because his brother had found favor with God. Not that his brother did the right thing, but that he had found favor with God. He was so angry, so blinded by that anger, that he literally went out and killed his own kid brother and somehow thought that he was going to get away with it. So God, of course, calls him right out and says, where's your brother? Knowing what the answer is. And then Cain, even after premeditatingly bringing his brother out there, killing him, then lying about it, trying to deceive the Lord, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now, verse 11, now you are under a curse. It's like having your picture made for, when you get taken into the jail. I don't ever want to see my picture there. You know what I mean? I don't ever want to have that picture of me looking like Nick Nolte, wasted out of my mind or anything like that. I don't want to have that picture, and I don't want to be under a curse from the Lord either. I think that's a really bad thing. And you are driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to you. Basically, Cain was able to farm and grow produce, and now that ground opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops to you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. It doesn't kill him, but a restless wanderer. Cain said to the Lord, after Cain has done all of these things, he's lied, he premeditated, he murdered, he tried to deceive God, everything. What does Cain say? My punishment is more than I can bear. And at the end of this, he is completely selfish about what he has done. This is too much, God. I shouldn't have to deal with this. I'm sorry, Sparky, you just killed your brother in cold blood. I think basically what we should do, if this was just a few years later and the law had been done, I believe you would have been taken out to the side of the road and stoned to death pretty well. So she said, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land and I will be hidden from your presence. He should have thought about that beforehand. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. And that's an important statement. Remember, if we're thinking about this account, everybody's sort of part of the same family at this point in time. Everybody's going to know what Cain did, so everyone is going to want to take revenge on Cain. So Lord said, no. If anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over. So the Lord protects Cain and says, if anything happens to you, I, the Lord, will mete out justice or vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod. The word Nod means to wander. So he became a nomad, east of Eden. So Cain didn't give first fruits. Okay, and you might say, well, he gave something. I mean, it shouldn't be so bad. The problem was I don't think, and this is just and in some of the commentary I've read, the problem is not so much that he didn't just give what he knew he should give. God gave him an opportunity to fix the problem. And says to Cain, you know what you're supposed to do. And if you do it, will you not find my favor? And Cain does not even respond to that. Immediately he goes out and kills his brother because he's so envious because his brother, and remember, Cain's the firstborn. Who's supposed to have favor? The firstborn is always supposed to have favor. So he's really mad about this because Abel has God's favor. At no time does Cain look at his own, what he did, and accept responsibility at all. Even when he kills his brother, he doesn't accept responsibility. God says, where is your brother? I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Well, we are. It's good to remember that. And I think that that's part of it. It's not just that he didn't give a good enough gift. And I know that's hard. I know people say, well, so if I don't tithe, or I don't do this, or I don't do X or Y, is God going to turn away from me? No, I don't think that's what that means at all. I think you do what you know you can, and the idea is to do it in the spirit that God has given it to you. At least that's what I think. So, Cain. So it gets better for Cain. So Cain lay with his wife.
Okay, question.
Yes.
Where'd she come from?
She's either a sister or a niece. There was no, incest wasn't precluded at this point in time. I don't have the faintest
I just
idea.
wanted to ask.
I don't
had
have
to
the
bring that
faintest
up.
You beat me to it.
Yeah.
I'm adamant about this. I've spent a lot of time fooling with this. People,
Really?
Neanderthal was around.
What'd you say?
Still is.
Neanderthal men were around.
This is what I missed last week.
And it
We
was
can talk
the
about
beginning
that.
of Adam and Eve were the first people to have a soul.
That's right.
The
He
spirit.
breathed the life into them. They are special.
Who was gonna kill Cain? Well, the other people around, there were a lot of people,
That's
they
right.
were animals.
No. They were human. They
Yeah,
were
they were
Homo
human.
sapiens.
But they didn't have that
You're making
soul.
it. Okay, you're making
I'd
it.
eat a woman.
Okay,
So there were other people. I think there were other people around.
I think there probably were other people around. The biblical scholars always want to talk about that it was like a niece or a cousin or something like that. You sit there and go, a niece or a cousin from whom? And then they say, well, Adam and Eve had a lot more children. They just don't mention all of that. Okay? Well, that
They
may,
mentioned Seth many years later.
but they don't mention. They don't. It's like what John says at the end. At the end of his gospel, he says, if all the stories about Jesus were written down, there'd be enough books to, So the idea is perhaps not everything was written down.
Think how sad, how boring that book of the Bible is. It talks about, and so had this one.
Yeah.
Can you imagine doing the whole thing?
No.
Ah, gosh.
Terrible. So, and it may be, this is an important, whether it's the soul of the Spirit or whatever that man is, or whether it is the people that God did not choose, okay, that were outside of God's chosen, even though Abraham hasn't been found yet, clearly this is the line of Abraham. We're going to go straight from Adam to Noah, Noah to Abraham. I mean, that's
the
where we're going to
important
go.
lineage.
Right.
That's why it's not all in there.
That's right. And then we'll talk, when we get to Abraham, we get to talk about Hagar and Ishmael too, which is always fascinating. And we're going to talk about the Nephilim at the end of this thing, which is really strange. I mean, really, really weird about what these people were and what they meant and everything like that. So, if those of the lineage of Adam were breathed of the Spirit and of God, is it that they married a person who was not of the Spirit, and in that intermarriage began and increased the sin that comes down further? I don't know the answer to that, okay? It's always the question, well, who was she? Where'd she come from? Who were her people?
See, I
Right?
talked about Neanderthals last week.
No,
No,
we did
no.
not talk about Neanderthals, and wrong time period, by the way. That'd be, Neanderthals, a few thousand years
Anyway.
later.
Not to get ahead about where all these people come from, but the next chapter talks about
Yeah,
in the notes, maybe some fallen angels,
right, maybe.
maybe created,
There's all sorts.
new
Right,
Betty Lou.
right.
And
And, we're going to get to Sodom and Gomorrah pretty quickly, and then there's tens of thousands of people. Okay, and I admit that Adam and Eve could have been busy, but they weren't that busy. I mean, you know, there's only so much.
I already told his name, but it's on.
Yeah.
It's still not much. It's still not much.
They're in there somewhere.
Okay, so listen, let's keep going, just because you can really get bogged down in some of these things where you're sitting there going, well, where did she come from, and what does that mean?
I just had that.
This is, huh?
I just had that.
You're totally fine asking that.
Well, is this not where some of the people, the naysayers,
Sure.
say this is just all a big fairy tale,
Sure.
can't be true?
Sure.
Is this some of the ammo that they use?
Sure, of course it is. Of course it is. And I'm not the one to tell you that that the Garden of Eden was a 1 acre by 1 acre plot, and it was in this part of the world, and this is exactly what happened. To me, this has always been, just to me, this has always been allegorical. This has been the story of how God, you see this look? You see the look?
Careful.
Okay. To me, this has always been an oral, symbolic tale of the fall from grace, about how when we are in right relationship with God, we are protected, and we are not, we fall away. And what the consequence of sin is, and what it does to us, our children, the people around us, to society in general, everything. That is, now, I'm not being a teacher now, that's just me, ma'am.
I won't belabor this, but the reason I disagree is because all these people, there is lineage, and it talks about the cities they built, and Enoch's back in Hebrews, they talk about them in the future. I mean, I think these people were real and they lived, and this is what happened.
One of the hardest parts about this is actually having the historicity. Having the historicity of this, and it's very, very difficult. No one was writing at that time and said, and reporting on Abraham, okay, or Isaac or Jacob, okay? They were not, okay? So
Sorry,
it's
go on now.
totally fine.
It's my say.
So you could say, and you are, now Cain yachted with his wife.
I mentioned the lobster piss.
That's and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Now this is a different Enoch. There are lots of different Enochs and Lamechs and stuff like that. Okay, but there's also, it's very interesting in the lineage of Seth, there are a total, including Adam, of 7 names, which is the number of completeness. Okay, and in the lineage of Cain, there are 7 names also, which is interesting. So Enoch, Cain was then building a city. Well, Cain was supposed to be a wanderer, right?
Couldn't farm.
Well, he couldn't farm.
Well, that.
Well, at the same time,
So he
you
became
know,
an
so
architect.
so he decided to be. That's right. He decided to be an architect.
And
Well,
became
even
a
though
virgin.
God basically said you're not supposed to do that, Cain said, you know what's my downside? I think I'll build a city. Okay.
He can't be killed.
So Cain lay with his wife and he gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city and he named it after his son Enoch. I don't know if there's a city named Enoch, but one would think that maybe Enochville or something like that was made. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mahujael, and Mahujael, was the father of Methushael, not Methuselah, and Methushael was the father of Lamech. Now Lamech was a bad dude. Not Lamech, the father of Noah. Different
That was my
guy.
question. Are you sure?
Different guy.
Okay.
So what did Lamech do? First thing,
Married twice.
he marries 2 women.
That was a really bad idea. I'm just gonna say.
I agree. So,
Did he have favor with God?
Did you have a
that's
choice?
right. So polygamy enters the world. Okay?
We gotta
What you're
multiply.
thinking about, this whole tribe of Cain now is basically saying, you know something? God turned his back on us, so whatever, we're going to do whatever the heck we want. Okay? So Lamech married 2 women, one named Adah and the other Zillah. Adah gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of all who live in tents and raise livestock. So the nomads. Okay? His brother name was Jubal. He was the father of all who played the harp and the flute, all musicians. And then finally, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. So this is sort of the beginning of industry and how you'd set up a civilization, right? Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. I don't know, she doesn't show up again. So Lamech says to his wives, Adah and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. Now listen to this. This is a tough one when you really, it took me a long time to sort of figure this one out. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. So in the Near East in that time period, he is already basically, the idea of an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth, although put forth in the scripture, was present in these civilizations for many, many, many years. The idea is the punishment has to fit the crime. If I lose, if you kill one of my animals, I get an animal of yours. If you break my leg, I break your leg. But if you wound me, you don't get to kill me. You don't get to heap vengeance upon me that is more than the injury, okay? So
he's admitting overdoing it.
well, and then he says, if Cain is avenged by God 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. So what Lamech is saying is, revenge will be part of my code. Lamech is the first mafioso. Lamech basically says, you take one of my people, they take 10 of you. So what an amazingly arrogant thing to say. Okay?
Really?
What an amazingly arrogant thing to say. Lamech basically boasts to his wives. He said, this young man wounded me, so I killed him. And if you think what God did to Cain was bad, anybody who does it to me gets 10 times that, 11 times that.
11 times what God would do to somebody that killed Cain.
So
That's pretty bold.
That's pretty bold, pretty arrogant. That does not work out for that lineage, let me just say. Okay? There's lots of bad things that are happening to them in the future that deal with water and not boats. So there you go. So this whole line who's building the city has basically, and one of the ideas of this whole line is that they have turned away from God completely. They have turned away. All right? Now, Adam came to know his wife again, which was nice, and she gave birth to a son named Seth, saying, and Seth means, like, basically, interestingly enough, means like replacement. So Seth was given by God to her to make up for the loss of Abel. God has granted me another child in place of Abel since Cain killed him. Seth also had a son, and he named him Enosh. Not Enoch, Enosh. And at that time, men began calling on the name of the Lord. Okay? So Seth, and in his line, there's this huge differential, and it really goes back to Abel and Cain. Abel understood from the very beginning the idea of first fruits, the idea of I'm going to give you the best of what I have because it's all from you anyhow. Okay? Cain never understood that. So from that lineage of Abel, Adam, Eve, Abel, Seth, and suddenly this lineage now begins calling on the name of God again. Cain's lineage, with Lamech as the 7th son, as basically is arrogant to the point of completely turning his back on God, to even boast to his wives to say, if God does vengeance 7 times, Lamech does vengeance 77 times. And obviously, Jesus talks about that later on. Lord, how many times must I forgive the person who hurts me? 7 times. And what does Jesus say? 77. Okay? So he's bringing that back. Or 7 times 7, whatever it is. Or you just
Just keep it honest, just keep it honest.
Well, wait a minute. I don't want to get this llama in trouble.
He's in trouble.
Because some of his kids did okay. The musician kid did okay.
You don't know that.
Well, I'm saying I don't think
He's the great-grandfather of Miley Cyrus. He's the great-grandfather of Miley Cyrus.
Okay,
Yes.
so the father of the tent and livestock people and the father of musicians all have the same curse that Lava had?
Well, all have the same curse. Well, that's a very good question. I don't know if they have Cain's curse, okay? And I suspect not. And then there's always this, the thread that goes throughout the entire Bible is that you can always turn back. That God is constantly reaching out to you and you can turn back. One would hope that the kids would be different than their dad, who is so arrogant to basically flout in the face of God and says, your vengeance is something, my vengeance is worse. That's not a good idea. From Adam to Noah. This is the written account of Adam's line. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. This is an important part. He created the male and female, and he blessed them, and when they were created, he called them man. When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness. No?
Question here.
Oh my
Sorry.
gosh.
I read this this
Now, would you
morning.
do
and
her
I
like
thought
that,
about
anybody else
some
like that?
things.
No way.
I have a question.
It's not a good idea to do her that way then.
When Abraham
Mhm.
is told he's going to have a son,
Right.
and he's 90-something years old, and they laugh because he's too old to have a child. What happened here?
Where do you think this was written? Do you think this was written down for Abraham?
I'm just asking the question.
No, this wasn't written down.
So you're saying when they did write it down, they wrote it down wrong?
I'm not saying that I don't know the answer to that.
Is
But
it
you
different
can't.
from here to Abraham as to
It's
how age
completely,
works?
well, yes, it was by the time of Abraham's life, the normal lifespan had gone to 120 years, and God says that.
Because
in
these
next-
are all the 900s back.
I know they are.
Okay.
Listen, there's an ancient text that talks about Near East kings, Assyrian kings who ruled for 72,000 years of peace. Okay?
72,000?
3 kings, 72,000 years.
And where is that written?
It's in one of the other, like Byzantium, or not Byzantium, early texts that's not part of the biblical text. 3,000, 4,000 years before Christ. Okay? There's all sorts of texts out there that exist. The flood, one of the interesting things about the flood is in every text. The Great Flood is in everything that's ever been
Every
written.
religion
It's
has that.
really, really fascinating to think about that. So,
It's a bad flood.
it's bad flood. It was bad flood. And it's like Colorado times 50. But it is, Cindy, when you ask the question about why did they laugh,
She found the answer.
give me the answer.
It said, after the flood, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be
120 years.
years. I know, but I'm just getting it down. I'm just figuring it out.
Okay.
I know, I have to see it here.
Well, I was getting there. So, it's important that at first, when God created Adam, Adam was made in God's image. After the fall, we're made in man's image. And sin is here now, okay? And now, we still have the spark of the soul, we still have all of those kinds of things, but it's different. It's very, very different. He named him Seth. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Okay, doesn't name them. Now he would have to have lots and lots and lots and lots of sons and daughters. That does not answer the question about who came married, because this was after that, right? Altogether, Adam lived 930 years. I cannot answer for you whether or not Adam lived exactly 930 years. I don't think this is, again, the first 11 chapters or so are basically primeval history. All right? And the idea, though, I think, is the line. There's also no text that documents that Noah was there, except for this. Okay, this text. There's no corroborating piece of evidence. At least in Jesus' time, there's a lot of corroborating evidence that Jesus lived. There are people that wrote and books that have survived and said, yes, he was there. This is what he did, besides the Bible. But this is, part of the faith thing, you guys.
Can I read this piece?
I don't know. Does that have anything to do with what we're talking about?
No.
Jump in.
I mentioned this 2 weeks ago. There were 3 sources of Genesis: Yahwist, Elohist, and priestly. 3 different traditions with which they put the whole Bible together. And in that spirit, it says, Adam's descendants until the flood. This enumeration of the 10 human generations between the creation and the flood is the sequence to the P, the priestly tradition. The P, account of creation in chapters 1, 2 through 4. According to the Hebrew text, the count covers a period of 1,656 years. Greek and Samaritan totals differ from the Hebrew and from each other, during which the human span of life is about 900 years. Thereafter, it is reduced to 200 to 600 years for the period from Noah to Abraham, to 100 to 200 years for the patriarchal period, and finally to 70 to 80 years as the normal limit. P's, which is the priestly tradition. At least one scholar suggested this account of man's gradually diminished lifespan as the P equivalent, the priestly tradition, P equivalent to the J story, the Jehovah's tradition.
Is that as in J. Gabriel or the?
Fall for a statement about longevity in the Messianic age, but the significance of the numerical systems is unknown.
Right.
Point is, if you want to spend a lot of time fooling with that, talking about that, we can get into it, but let's.
So basically, as the lifespan went down, because they were having more wives.
When Seth had lived 105 years rolling on, he became the father of Enosh. And after he became the father of Enosh, 807 years and had lots of other sons and daughters. Seth lived 912 years, and then he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he became the father of Kenan. And after he became the father of Kenan, Enosh lived 815 years and also had sons and daughters. And Enosh lived 905 years, and then he died. And then Kenan lived 70. He became the father of Mahalalel. Is that right, Mahalalel? Something like Mahalalel. And after he became the father of Mahalalel, Kenan lived 840 years. He had lots of other sons and daughters, and he lived 910 years. Notice that there's this decreasing trend of when these people are having babies. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he became the father of Jared. And after he became the father of Jared, he lived 830 years and had other sons and daughters. He lived 895 years. When Jared had lived 162 years, here's a different, he goes back up, he became the father of Enoch, a different Enoch. Okay? Different guy. And after he became the father of Enoch, Jared lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Jared lived 962 years. Enoch lived 65 years. He was the father of Methuselah. Okay? And after he became the father, now this is important. When Enoch had lived 65 years, this is verse 21, he became the father of Methuselah. And after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Although altogether Enoch lived 365 years. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more because God took him away. Enoch did not die. He was one of the two. So he walked with God. Who else got taken up?
Elijah.
There you go.
The chariot of fire.
That's right. So Enoch walked with God. So Enoch must have been a godly man. He walked with God for 300 years. And when it was time, God just took him up. He just said, man, you're good. Let's go. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech, a different Lamech, a good Lamech. Okay? That's good. Father of Lamech, Methuselah lived 782 years, and he lived 969 years, but Methuselah died. So he must not have walked with God quite as good as Enoch did. But when Lamech had lived 182 years, he had a son, and he named him Noah. And he said, he will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground that the Lord has cursed. So, the ground has still been cursed, but Noah is going to be there. But after Noah was born, Lamech lived 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Together, Lamech lived 777 years, and then he died. And after Noah was 500 years old, he had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay? Now we're just going to read a very beginning part of the flood. Okay? When men, because I want you to think about this. This is chapter 6. When men began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them that they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. Remember, he closed off the Garden of Eden so they could not eat of the tree of life and live forever. His days will be 120. So all of a sudden he says it. Now, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards. It's also mentioned in Numbers. When the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them, they were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Nephilim are really, it's pretty interesting. There's all sorts of theories about who these people were. Fallen angels who had fallen out of the grace of God, who then married mortal women, and then by that marriage created heroes of old, which is, y'all, right out of Greek mythology, right out of Greek and Roman mythology. I mean, it's basically, if you look at all of that, all of Achilles and Jason, they're all the product of a human and godly union. And so it's really interesting. And in Numbers, there's this period of time where God is getting ready for the Israelites to go fight this battle. And they go to spy, and they see these, and they call them the Nephilim, and they come back and they say, we're not fighting these guys. We look like grasshoppers compared to them. They would just swat us away. So really an interesting thing about, they say that, I mean, in the account, both before and after the flood, now that's really confusing because supposedly the only people that survived the flood were Noah, his wife, and his 3 sons and their wives. And that's it. So it really makes you think that the Nephilim maybe weren't humans. that they were potentially angels or fallen angels or something like that. It's pretty interesting. So it gets mentioned here, it gets mentioned in Numbers, and then it's sort of gone. And it's a very fascinating aside. And if you read a million different theories about what this may be, I don't know what it is. So
What does Nephilim mean?
I do not know the answer to that question. I will look it up for you.
Anybody got their phone out to Google?
Get your phone, Nephilim in Hebrew.
What?
Maybe like great ones or something like that.
Scott, I have a question. Why do you think it's so important for all those, why did they put all those numbers in there?
Oh, I don't know.
I mean, it seems like so trite. Like, what
Well,
does that really matter about anything?
I think there are all sorts of theories, mathematical theories about the meaning of numbers throughout the Bible, the Bible code. You guys,
Right.
you've heard about that, seen that. Sig's talked about it a bunch of time in the late great planet Earth. There's this whole thing about the numbers and what they mean. To an ancient people, the other thing I think it's really important to remember, we flippantly make the assertion that it was a 365-day year. That calendar didn't exist at all.
true.
That didn't exist at all.
You know, these men having babies for the first time at 65 and 100 and something, I mean, realistically, I think I don't mean to be funny with this, but like in dog years, you're older. No, but seriously, they would be fertile long before 165 years, I would assume, if they were similar to human like us. So I just think.
But that's a good question.
Well,
There
it is a question.
are people that believe, though, that initially Adam was so close to God, even though he sinned, that he was more like God than man. And so one of the theories about the lessening of lifespan has to do with the further distance from God. Remember, Adam was created in God's image. From the fall and thereafter, we're all created in Adam's image. Now, we've got some of God's image, but, it's almost like that. There's just that slope that goes down. Yes, sir.
So you don't think that through the course of time, that the sun, that the earth turning wasn't 24 hours? Or it didn't take 1 year
With a different
to
calendar.
go all
It
the
just
way
depends on
around?
how you define it.
Based on-
They didn't know that.
Based on
I understand, but I
different
mean, I think it hadn't changed.
It
Well,
has.
no. It hasn't changed.
So
But-
that's a year.
But the terminology of year and the measurement of year that we now accept probably wasn't exactly the same now. Remember, they did their deal was 28 days always, and that's why the Jewish calendar is basically a lunar calendar, because that's the one that's exactly.
Well, that's why that had to do with Caesar and Augustus Caesar, and they
Sure.
decided they were too arrogant that I had to have 31 days in my month and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
I mean,
I agree.
But the civilization, all the different calendars over all the different civilizations, if you actually do the math, the 900 years might be months.
No one knows.
And then the 5 and 600 years, when they were living 5
And
and
we're
600
focused on
years,
stuff that doesn't
might
matter.
be
Yeah,
quarters.
Then 65 years would be 12 months. Okay,
At some
or
point,
12
they
years.
said,
so that
but
doesn't work
winter
very
or
well.
fall,
Do you-
winter's a
But Marcia,
year.
it
What you
doesn't
got?
matter why they put it in there.
Do you know
That's
what
my
I noticed
question
about
is
Nephilim?
why
They
is
don't
it so
grow
important?
Let me
crops
hear
the
it.
same.
Okay,
Nephilim, hold on, Nephilim.
Winter and spring.
All right.
They don't grow the same.
It says there's a great deal of confusion over the word Nephilim. No one today really knows what it means. It is related to the verb series to fall, Nephal, in Hebrew, which is why some direct this to fallen angels, or more appropriately, the offspring thereof. However, this also gives strong support to the view that men who had fallen away from God, it was these two concepts that helped give rise to the various views mentioned above. So it says, that it could have been fallen angels that almost like possessed ungodly men.
Wow.
But then it says the not non-Christian, but non-traditionalist view is that there's a view of people who think they were aliens from other planets.
Oh,
But that
yeah,
is
of
not
course.
widely accepted.
That makes
That's what it
perfect sense.
says.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that Wikipedia?
Just to
No,
change the subject.
No, it was
totally.
not Wikipedia. I did not
To
think
go
it was
into next
Wikipedia.
week's lesson,
Okay.
when I probably won't be here.
Well, neither will I, so we gotta talk about
I want
that.
those of you with mathematical and physics minds to calculate water weighs 6 pounds per gallon. 8 pounds per gallon. That's
Yeah, I thought it was 3 point something.
the amount of water that has to fall constantly for 40 days to cover the entire square surface of the earth in square miles, to cover the entire earth.
It didn't just fall, though, I don't think.
Just the weight of the water alone and what it would have done to the surface of the earth. And my second question is, where did it go?
It evaporated quickly.
quickly.
God's,
That's the same.
remember, God's a great God, He can do that kind of stuff.
Just a
Sounds
thought.
kind of like the
Just a
question
thought.
that Pinto was asking the professor in Animal House with his first exposure to cannabis.
Yeah. You mean we could all be one tiny
Tiny
little
little-
cell in it?
Here's the- I think one of the most important things when you study Genesis is you can absolutely get bogged down
Yes.
in 900, 300, 400, how long was a day? What does this mean? What does all this mean? Yes,
Oh,
ma'am.
just one more thing on this. This is interesting. I went to another site. It said that this site is BiblePro.com, and it's saying that the Nephilim were they were Satan's attempt to prevent the coming seed of woman foretold in Genesis 3:16 that was going to overthrow him by, having kind of having the fallen angels intermarry with women to be. So
It's
that's
a
interesting.
fascinating, what I like about this when we think about things like this, here's this mention in the Bible, and then when you look at Greek and Roman mythology, it's such a fascinating thing that somehow, and when we get, and for those of you who have not really studied the patriarchs and thought about Abraham and the relationship to Hagar and Ishmael and what happens, and it's just fascinating. But back to the point. There are scholars and others who will argue this without end. And I think the point, or one of the major points is first of all, the majesty of God, the fact that we are fallen, okay? And that God constantly seeks us out, and asks us to turn back toward Him, and that we have that opportunity to do so. And then I think also throughout this is what is the effect of sin? What does it do? What does it do to our people? What does it do to our families? What does it do to civilization? All of those kinds of things, I think, are sort of the main things that go through here. Now, next week, Cindy and I will be going. We're going to a meeting, so we'll be out next week, and we can do one of two things. If somebody wants to do Noah and the flood, we can do that, or we can wait till I come back. I mean, whatever you guys want to do. I mean, it doesn't make any difference to me.
I'll vote wait.
Well,
Wait, yeah.
We can do Noah and the flood in 2 weeks, and then I'm back. I think we've figured out a way for me to be here every day. So
Now, Sig has mentioned that there's some things that he'd like to teach, something
I
like
guarantee you.
beer, something like that, beer thing that he's mentioned that he was
I want
interested
y'all
So
to
ask
record
Sig to
that
come
on
next
this.
week.
I remember Sid.
I know you will. All right, so next week, if you guys want to get together just to chat or whatever, anything like this, but in 2 weeks, we'll do the flood. Because and I'll try to really, bring in some of the other, we'll talk about Gilgamesh and some of the other things where we can talk about maybe some of the other flood narratives, because it's pretty fascinating. And someone is tasked with coming up with how much water.
It's 8 pounds a gallon for 40 days.